Hey guys, Jeremy here with Simple Little Life. Welcome to another edition of Tool Time Tuesday. This week we're going to talk about drill presses. But first, viewer knives. The first knife we'll take a look at this week is sent to me from John, and John is from Ohio, and he actually used a file to make his knife out of. He used it as the material. One thing he had done is, instead of annealing the blade before he worked with it, he ground the teeth off the file and then also ground his bevels while using a water-soluble oil to keep it cool so it wouldn't ruin the temper. And that's a really interesting way to go. I've never thought of that, but a really great concept. Interesting approach to making a knife there. I really like that. You can see he did a Tonto-style blade with antler for the handle, and I think it turned out really great. So thank you, John, for sending that in to us. The next knife we're going to take a look at is from Mitch, and this one again is made from a file or a rasp, and that's a really great option. If you can't find steel to make a knife with, files and rasps are generally high quality, high carbon steel, and they work really great as materials to make a knife with. So this one here sent to us from Mitch is a rasp knife, and I like how he left some of the rasp pattern on there. A lot of guys do that. I think it looks really cool, and a great looking little blade here. I like the handle material. He doesn't say what that is, but it looks like some type of micarta or G10. Really great looking blade, nice Kydex sheath there for it. Very nicely done, Mitch. Thank you for sending your pictures in. And the last knife we'll take a look at this week is from Chase, and Chase sent this picture of his knife, his first knife, and I think it looks fantastic. Now, one thing Chase had mentioned in his email is that when he was halfway through the project, he was kind of discouraged and felt like throwing it out because it just wasn't looking that great, but he kept on it and he finished the blade anyways. And I'm telling you, that's a really important aspect in knife making. Your first knife is probably not going to be all that gorgeous. Your second or third, they're going to get better, but they still might not be really great blades. But one thing with knife making is that you're going to end up with a whole bunch of sharp objects kicking around the shop. I've got tons of them around here, knives that just didn't quite turn out, but excellent job, Chase, on continuing this one and finishing it up. I think it looks fantastic. Thanks for sharing your knives, guys. I appreciate that. If you'd like to have your knife featured on this channel, just email me, jeremy@homesteadknives.com. Now, let's take a look at drill presses. Alright, so one of the most common tools I get asked about in my videos are drill presses. Everybody wants to know what drill presses do you have, what I should look for when I'm buying a drill press, and rightfully so. A drill press, in my opinion, is one of the early tools you should look at purchasing when you're setting up your shop. Obviously, you can do a lot of the work that a drill press could do with a hand drill, but if you have a lot of holes to do and you start making more stuff, it's amazing how much work it is once you start drilling all these holes by hand. You can do a much more precise job with a drill press, and as well, just pulling on the lever and using the mechanical advantage, so much easier in your body than standing over a drill and pushing it through like that. So definitely something to consider if you're looking at building up a shop and acquiring tools. A fairly common staple in all sorts of different shops. So onto my drills. Neither of the drill presses that I have are of any decent quality. They're both pretty cheap. This one I ended up buying off of my brother-in-law. I think I paid like $100 for it. This one here is a Mastercraft from Canadian Tire, and it's pretty junky, honestly. It's not the greatest drill press. It doesn't matter what brand you buy. It seems that so many tools, the way they're manufactured nowadays, they kind of get farmed out and just rebranded. So let's kind of take a look at a few of the options and features, and if you're looking to buy a drill press, some things to consider. First thing we want to talk about is its size. Now, there's a few different things that they kind of size them by. The first one, this here is actually labeled a 10-inch. And what that will refer to is not the table size, but rather the distance between the chuck and this table when it's in its lowest position. So in theory, it would be a 10-inch capacity. Now, that's obviously not the case, because if I took a 10-inch block of wood and I've got a drill bit in there, well, I've already lost about 2 inches from my drill bit. But that's just kind of how they size it there. It's a 10-inch in between the chuck and the table when it's all the way down. Another feature or item that they'll size drill presses with, and this one is kind of interchangeable because you can change these out, but that's the chuck. Now this one here has a 1/2-inch chuck, meaning that the shank of the drill bit I can fit in here will be a 1/2 inch in diameter. This one over here is actually a 5/8 diameter, a 5/8 chuck, so I could fit a drill bit that has a 5/8 diameter. Now don't consider that to mean that I can only drill up to a 5/8 hole with this, because most drill bits, when you get up into the larger ones, anything under 1 inch, like 5/8, 3/4, 11/16, most of those will typically have a 1/2 inch shank on them anyway. So in theory, I could fit those bits into the smaller drill press. The one thing to consider when you're looking at different sizes, generally the smaller the drill press, the higher its speed range is going to be. An example, this one here runs between 570 RPM and 3050 RPM. Whereas this larger drill press goes between 340 to 2800. So this one has a slower gear, slower speed range. It actually has more speeds, and I'm going to show you that feature in just a minute. But that's one thing to consider. If you buy a really small drill press, it's meant for small bits. Obviously, small bits spin faster than large bits. Also, I'll show you a quick formula in a minute that will very quickly help you calculate the proper cutting speed for the certain size drill bit that you're using. And one of the last things to consider when you're looking at buying a drill press is its motor size. Typically they'll size them in horsepower, until you get into these smaller ones, then they'll just go with an amperage draw. Example, this big one here, this vintage piece, is a 1/2 horsepower motor. This small one doesn't actually give me a horsepower rating on it, but rather just says it's a 3.2 amp. So I'm assuming it's probably maybe a 1/3 horse, maybe even a 1/5 or something like that. One thing to consider when you're looking at buying a drill press is its power requirements. Obviously you get like a really large floor model with a 1 horsepower motor. That is a big motor for a drill press. It's going to take a lot of electricity, and if you have a lot of other stuff on that circuit, might not run so well without tripping breakers. So just something to consider if you're looking at buying one. And one feature that I would consider very important when you're looking to buy a drill press is an ability to have a light built onto the drill press. Both of these have a light, and they're mounted usually in the frame here somewhere. And I consider that incredibly important because even if you have a well-lit shop, when you're doing real fine work, first of all, you've got all your gearing and stuff over top of your drill press, so that's blocking some of the light. And second of all, when you're trying to line up really fine holes that you've center punched and stuff, just having really great light makes that task so much easier. So when you're looking to buy a drill press, I would consider it to be a requirement to have the ability to have a light built into it. Not an add-on light, not something you swing around. Those are a pain in the butt, especially when built-in lights are fairly common and I would say almost fairly standard for most drill presses. So keep that in mind when you're looking to buy a drill press. Now, there's not a lot that can go wrong with drill presses. They don't need a lot of maintenance, so I would certainly recommend buying a used drill press if you can find them. Certain items in your shop, like an air compressor, that is a tool that if it's not being properly looked after, it can have a lot of wear on it. And certainly the same goes for a drill press as well. However, there's less that can go wrong and less maintenance required to keep a drill press operating proper and well looked after. So certainly used drill presses, in my opinion, are an excellent way to go. And both these drill presses are considered benchtop models, meaning that the base of the drill press itself does not go all the way to the floor. For not a lot of more money, you can actually buy floor standing models, which are kind of nice. You can anchor them down to your floor. But for a lot of stuff like this, these benchtop models are really handy, especially the fact you can kind of move them around. A lot of people will mount them on top of toolboxes, you fit them around. I kind of almost prefer the benchtop models because I never need the capacity that you get when you have a floor model. Usually you can run the table a lot lower and you have a lot more distance between the table and your chuck, but I've never really found that to be something I really need. So I'm really quite a big fan of these benchtop models. Okay, now I'm going to grab the camera, we'll do a close-up here, and I'll show you a few differences between these two drill presses, and again, some things you might want to consider if you're looking to buy your own. Alright, so taking a look at some of the different features. Now, we're going to do a little comparison between these two drill presses, just to show you what's up. Now, if you look at this one, you'll notice there's only one V-belt, and we've got the pulley off of the motor, and then the pulley that's on the spindle. So this really only has 5 speeds. It's got, you can see them right there. And that's just kind of the design of these small ones. Most of these smaller ones are going to be single speed like that, and that's just kind of how they are. Get into the larger ones like this, you'll notice we have an idler pulley in the middle. And what that does is it gives us an extra little bit of gearing option of different speed ranges. So we've got the pulley off of our motor, we've got our idler pulley, and then the pulley on this spindle. And if we look over here, see all the different speeds available to us. We've actually got 12 speeds as opposed to 5 on that one. One important thing when you are adjusting the speeds, kindly, I encourage you strongly to unplug your drill press every single time. I can actually set up a little scenario on this one right here. Now, if I were to, obviously when you go to change your speeds, you'll loosen off these little locking screws down there, and this motor will slide back, and you have to get your hands in there. There's no real way to change speeds on a belt. I mean, you can kind of thumb it up and over, but really your hands are touching belts and pulleys. Now, look, for example, this is the on-off switch on this one right here. If I just accidentally happen to have a sleeve caught on there, and I'm free and clear right now, but if I did that while I was changing the belts, and then my sleeve caught, all of a sudden, I've just turned on the machine with my fingers in there, and say goodbye to your fingers, really painful anyway. So definitely unplug your drill press when you're changing speeds. It's a really good practice, and I'd highly recommend it. As well, the tables on most drill presses can move up and down, and that's just done by loosening off a lever Most of them just have this collar that locks around this main column here. You'll just loosen that off and then use this hand crank to raise and lower your table depending on the material you're cutting. Just use a little rack and pinion type system. And again, you can go all the way down. They can spin out of the way. So if you had something really large, you can set it on the base there and drill it. Really work quite well. So on this drill press here, I've got a little laser guide, and my experience with these little laser guides is that they're kind of gimmicky. I don't know if you see the crosshairs really well there, but I don't know. I find this one here is off by 1/16 of an inch, and it's a real pain in the butt to adjust. So to me, anytime I've had tools that have had like laser crosshairs or guides and stuff like that, I think they're kind of gimmicky. I'm not a huge fan, but rather one thing that I find very important, an accessory when you're looking for a drill press, it's pretty much a deal breaker to me, is a light. To me, that is 10 times more useful than some little laser thing. Now, one little tip, when you're tightening up a drill bit into a chuck, 3-jaw chuck, Jacobs chuck. I think Jacobs is the brand of the original style, but it's important to actually tighten on all 3 of these little holes. So obviously you stick your drill key in there, give this one a bit of a snug. You don't want to crank it too hard on the first one. Go around to the next one, give it a little more, and then finish it up on the 3rd one. And that's just an old school trick that I learned from a gentleman I worked with. It just kind of helps keep an even pressure, and it'll actually make your chucks last a lot longer. So obviously a drill press is a big piece of rotating equipment, and gloves are typically a no-no. You really don't want to wear gloves when you're using these. Also, watch out for things like bracelets and watches, wedding rings. Those can be dangerous. Maybe a tattoo is a safer option. But I get a lot of comments on the orange gloves that I wear in my videos, and those ones, I can actually grab them and just rip them. They're pretty much like nylon, like pantyhose or something like that. So I'm not worried about those snagging and getting myself caught up, but I would never wear like heavy leather gloves or gloves that have some substance to them, because those things, if they snag wrong, you get a bit, or some of the filings come off and catch you, they can really hurt you pretty quickly. These drill presses will teach you painful lessons very quickly, so use a lot of caution when you're working with a drill press. So drill presses, like many other tools, are often well suited for other accessories. One that I would probably recommend you get is a simple drill press vise. These are relatively inexpensive. I picked this one up used, but even new, I think again for $30 or $40. They give you the option to clamp down your vise to different spots within your slots and stuff like that. Bolt them down. And even not necessarily always bolting it down, sometimes it's just nice to have this to clamp your workpiece to, and that will give you enough support. If you're drilling a smaller hole, if you grab onto here, get a good purchase on it. Like I say, smaller holes, definitely you don't need to clamp this down. It's kind of nice because you can just clamp your material down, drill your hole, and pull it out, and you're good to go. When I'm drilling, say if I'm lightening up a knife handle and I need to put all these holes in there, it could be a real pain to clamp this down to the table every single hole. So I'll warn you, use your own discretion with this one. A lot of people think this is a horrible idea. A lot of people do it all the time, like myself, and it works perfectly fine for us. But I'll just take a vice grip and clamp this onto the table here, just to give it a stop to prevent a helicopter. Helicopters when your bit grabs and your material starts spinning around, and especially if you're working with something like a knife, it's already been ground. It's got a point on it. This is just gonna cut you up. Even other material, if it's not a knife, it can be really dangerous to get it spinning around. Could go flying across the shop, grab you, just smash your knuckles once and bust open the skin. So definitely use your discretion with something like this. I'm not giving this as a recommendation. However, I use this all the time and it's been perfectly safe for me. So just something to think about. Also, they do make vice grips that actually bolt into the slots here, and those are actually a really slick option. I should probably just buy one of those, because that way you can actually line up your stuff, and then when you're ready to drill it, you just boom, clamp it down with a vice grip and it's clamped. So much more convenient than trying to line this up and like this. Those are a nice option too. I don't have one of those. I should probably just get one. And another thing that I've seen people do, and I'm not necessarily recommending it, but you can buy vices that are cross-sliding vices. So you'll clamp it down, and a lot of them will have a screw adjustment in 2 different axes. I've seen guys take those, mount them to their drill press table, put an end mill cutter, so this is like the cutter that you'd use for a milling machine, and actually use a drill press as a type of a milling machine. Now again, not all that precise. I certainly wouldn't recommend it for steel and stuff, but for a lot of stuff like wood or synthetics, you know, handle materials and stuff like that, that's always an option too. And some people have used it with success on wood and aluminum, steel and aluminum and stuff like that. So I'm going to put a picture of one of those cross slide vices up in the corner. Again, I don't own one of those, but that's something to consider too. The one thing with a drill press is it can be adapted to do a lot of different tasks. And again, using a drill press for things other than just drilling holes, you can put in different flapping discs, different burrs for cutting in the drill chuck, turn it on and actually hold your workpiece. That's always an option too. Gives you a lot of different choices. Now, I mentioned a formula that I use to figure out the RPM to turn my drill bits at, and it's a really simple formula. When I was doing some research for this video, I couldn't find anything this simple. They're much more complicated, elaborate formulas. This is ultimately just a mathematically simplified version of all of those. So, this formula, RPM is equal to 4, which is a constant in this formula, that doesn't ever change, times the cutting speed, I'm going to talk about that in 1 second, divided by the diameter. Different materials have different cutting speeds. As a general rule, this is kind of close. I'm kind of going from memory here, but I'm pretty sure I'm not too far off. Mild steel, 100 surface feet per minute. What that means is that in 1 minute, you could take a linear cut that's 100 feet long, and that is the ideal speed to cut mild steel. Aluminum, it's a softer material, you can cut it faster, 200 to 300 surface feet per minute. That also goes for things like brass and copper. There's certain things that change it, but as a general rule, it's these numbers here. The harder the steel, like tool steel, high carbon steels, those need to be cut slower. Those are typically about 50 to 60 surface feet per minute. You get into woods and plastics, I mean, there's a huge range on those, but a general guideline, 300 to 900 surface feet per minute, and this can be plus or minus either way. But as a general rule, I always remember this one right here. Mild steel, 100 surface feet per minute. So if we come back to our little formula, say if we want to drill a 1/4 inch hole into mild steel. What we'll do to figure out our RPM, we'll take 4 times the cutting speed, mild steel is 100, and we'll divide that by the diameter, in this case, 0.250. If I run these things through a calculator, I'll come up with 1600 RPM. Very slick. Now if you use the longer, more elaborate versions, you'll come up with a slightly different number. I think it's a little bit slower if I remember correctly, but this will get you close enough, and this is such a simple formula. So if I were you, I would take a minute and write this down. And again, cutting speed based on your material, and the diameter is always as a decimal, never fraction. 1/4 inch, 0.250, 3/8, 0.375, 1/2 inch, 0.5, and on and on. This formula will get you really close to figure out your RPM for that size of drill bit. All right, so one last thing I should probably address, because I'm sure it'll come up in the comments if I didn't. Why do I have 2 drill presses? Well, that's easy. I just drill a lot of holes. Typically in the small one, I'll leave it set up with a pilot hole, something that's like 1/16 to 1/8. And what a pilot hole does is that it drills your first hole, really tiny little hole, and it allows larger drill bits to cut more efficiently. So that's all this one usually does, is just sits here with a small drill bit. If I've say got 18 holes to put into a tang of a knife, I'll drill them all out with a small bit first, and then I'll move over to this drill press and I'll drill out the appropriate size holes for my pins or for weight reduction holes or whatever. So just the fact that it really speeds up my process, that's the only reason I have 2 of them. You certainly don't need to. Certainly can't have enough of them as well. If I found a really great deal on a 3rd drill press, I'd probably park it right beside these 2 and use it quite regularly as well. So for all those that were asking about these, hopefully this gave you the information you're looking for. And if you're considering purchasing a drill press, hopefully you maybe saw a few things to think about that you hadn't thought of before. And if you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.